The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
It was one for...
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man, in Alameda, California. We've had a visit this morning by two families of turkeys. Early in the morning, sitting out on the porch, waiting for the day to start, and all of a sudden, 11 baby turkeys and two mothers come to our front yard, and they hang for a while, and then they go across the street, and they're gone. So I don't know what to make of that, but a little wildlife isn't bad. And speaking of turkeys, the Yankees are starting to play ball. Babe Ruth's grandson told me. How about that? James Bloomer, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you very much, Ralph. Good to be here.
I've enjoyed our conversations a whole bunch. I'm learning about you. I'm learning about your family. And the thing I learned the other day, last week, or the week before, was that your grandfather, Mr. Ruth, George Herman Ruth, befriended, and I think he was considered a close friend of Shoeless Joe Jackson. And your grandfather used Mr. Jackson as kind of a hitting coach. Am I correct?
Definitely a mentor of my granddad. See, in 1919, when the World Series was thrown, Landis hadn't suspended those players or banned them from baseball yet, so they were still playing in 1920. And my grandfather had been traded to the Yankees, and the White Sox would stay at the Ansonia Hotel in New York City, and my granddad had a bachelor pad there. So he and Shoeless Joe were very close, and he attributed Shoeless Joe's mentoring to be able to hit 342, because when you're swinging as hard as my granddad did for long ball and you can still hit 342, that says something about a guy who's your mentor who hit 357. Shoeless Joe is one of the greats of all time. I mean, and they were very close. And Shoeless really repatterned my granddad's swing for the load and the hips and the hands, and he was instrumental in the Babe's success.
Nice. Did they ever talk about the scandal?
Well, they did, but they didn't want to say too much because they hadn't been banned. You know, they were going to court, and they weren't held guilty in court. They were exonerated in court, but Landis still banned them. And see, Shoeless Joe took $5,000, but he gave it back. It's like robbing a bank and then having second thoughts and going back in and giving the money back. But he hit 375 in that World Series. So, I mean, he wasn't trying to throw anything. He wasn't throwing the ball. He wasn't pitching. And that's where, if you're going to throw a ball game, that's where it's done, between the pitcher and the catcher.
Right. His life was obviously never the same. Your grandfather helped him get started in a business, and was he reported on? In other words, did reporters come to him for stories over the years? or did he just fade
Well,
into
they
oblivion?
really had to keep separation because he'd been banned, and all those whites. My granddad was friends with all those guys. He'd go out drinking with them all the time when they were in Chicago or New York, and so once they were banned, he did not have contact with them. He couldn't, and because Landis would have banned my granddad, and that wasn't going to happen. So,
Right. That, for baseball's sake, how about that?
yeah.
Okay, now we know about Shoeless and your dad's relationship. How about Ty Cobb?
Well, my granddad had a great empathy for Ty Cobb. I mean, he appreciated him as the greatest ball player of all time. He was the first voted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and my granddad was number 2. But Ty played a different type of game than my granddad. He was hits, doubles, he stolen bases, stolen home, and my granddad played for the long ball. And one weekend, they were in Detroit, and Ty Cobb, Ty was 10 years older than my grandfather. So, and they had this in common, that they both experienced a tragedy when they were 17 years old. My granddad, my great-grandfather, was killed in an alley behind his bar on Utah Street in Baltimore by a customer that he got in an argument with. Well, he tried to break up a fight between 2 customers, and he ended up hitting his head and fracturing his skull and dying. And Babe was 17 when that happened, and Ty Cobb's father was murdered by his mother when he was 17. So it was a little strange. It was 10 years apart, of course, but it was a little, they had that in common. So when Ty Cobb didn't appreciate my granddad hitting all those home runs, I don't know if it was jealousy or if it was just that wasn't the game that they were playing in those days. My granddad created a new game, basically. And so one weekend they were playing in Detroit, and Ty said, "I'll show you." And Ty hit 5 home runs in the weekend in 3-game series. So it wasn't like Ty could not hit the long ball, but he went back to hitting singles and doubles and triples because he was a very fast, tough ball player, and he had the great respect they didn't like him. The people that played against him didn't like him, but they certainly respected him because he did sharpen his spikes, and he would go in high and tear you up. So, but one of the things is in my movie, I want to show the relationship that my grandfather had with Ty. They played golf all the time after Ty was retired and Babe was retired. And they had after the induction ceremony on June 12th, 1939, they had a game at Doubleday Field, and my grandfather was so far out of shape that he was 44 years old, but he was really out of shape, so he was just a designated hitter for that game. And Ty didn't play. None of the older Hall of Famers played. But it was after that game, the next day they played a golf match at Leather Stockings Golf Course, which is the Hall of Fame golf course at the Otesaga Hotel. And the Otesaga is the center for the Hall of Famers. Like we had 53 in this year for the induction ceremony of McGriff and Rollins. And they stay there, and they're fed there, and they party there and play cards, and they have separate functions for just the Hall of Famers. One year I was there in '84. I was in the room and I played cards with Mel Allen and Warren Spahn. And that was an experience. Yeah, but,
I can imagine.
Yeah, but I was interviewing I was interviewing all these guys that had played. I was writing a story on Nellie Fox, who played for the White Sox, and Coach Joe Morgan in Houston was his batting coach, basically. And so consequently, I interviewed like Johnny Mize and Hank, or not Sauer, but Bob Lemon and Bob Feller, and I forget who. There were a couple other. Oh, Minnie Minoso. Minnie Minoso had played with Nellie Fox, and he was the first Cuban to play for the White Sox. So,
1959 World Series, as a matter of fact.
Yep. And today is the day, or yesterday was Don Drysdale's birthday, and Don Drysdale was one of the heroes when I was a kid with Sandy Koufax. He would never come out to our Little League field and give clinics because he was Don Drysdale. But to know the importance of Don Drysdale in the area, the banker on the Beverly Hillbillies was named Drysdale.
Mr. Drysdale, yes, that's absolutely. I still picture that woman, his assistant, Mr. Drysdale. It's just, ironically, that was an excellent show. I mean, it was just for pure entertainment. We don't have that in our vernacular today, where you can just say it was just fun. It didn't mean anything.
Well, when I was a kid, I used to caddy at the South Hills Country Club, and every year they had a celebrity tournament, and I drove Jethro around for 18 holes in a golf cart. That was my job one day.
Wow.
So I was raised in that. Tommy Bernansky's brother, Joe, his dad was an All-American football player, and Joe was a good golfer and a good football player and a good baseball player. And we would always hang out at South Hills Country Club. And Tommy was 6 years behind Joe, and so I didn't really know Tommy, the slugger, for Minnesota.
Right.
But the irony of
let me
go ahead.
Go. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
No, I was just going to ask you, what was the extent of your dad's disappointment in not being a manager?
Oh,
or your
it was great. I mean, yeah, it was great. I mean, Rupert had been manager of 1980 Red Sox.
Right.
And Rupert then went to the Yankees, bought the Yankees, and became the builder of the house that Ruth built, Yankee Stadium. So he was making a lot of money off my grandfather, and he paid him $80,000 a year, but Rupert was making a whole heck of a lot more than that. And so in 1934, my granddad had the opportunity to manage the Cincinnati Reds, but he still had that contract with the Yankees. And he was getting toward the end there. He wasn't producing like he did earlier in his career. And Rupert wouldn't let him out of his contract in 1934. So consequently, the next spring, in spring training, Rupert lets him go, and he goes to the Boston Braves. And the irony of that was he hit 3 of the longest home runs ever hit in Forbes Field on one day. The last 3 home runs he ever hit, 7-12, 7-13, 7-14. And Grantland Rice was there. They knew it was the end of his career, so Grantland Rice was there, and he described him as 3 of the longest home runs ever hit out of Forbes Field. So even at 34, he was still hitting the ball a long way, but he never got another offer to manage. He was blackballed. And there's nothing else to call it. When he got a coaching job.
Did Rupert do the blackballing?
Yeah, because he was envious of the Babe, because everywhere he went, he was upstaged by my grandfather, and those situations happen. They happen in Hollywood, and they happen in sports. And George Steinbrenner did not want anybody to upstage him. When he walked in a room, he wanted everybody's eyes to be on him. And funny story, Marty Appel was the publicity agent for the Yankees for a long time, and George Costanza, from Seinfeld, he was patterned after Marty Appel was Costanza, and he appeared here about 3 weeks ago to promote his book. He's written 27 books on the Yankees, and I had to laugh. Joanne Forbes, a good friend of mine, was here, and she took a picture of Marty and I in the library getting his book signed. But it's a small world. It really is a small world when you get down to it. I just absolutely. So you're a kid growing up, and somebody tells you about the Babe for the first time. Do you remember that? Well, see, I didn't know I was Babe Ruth's grandson until 2010. My mom. Oh, wow. My mom never shared it. I was the only one in my family that had baseball ability. I hit a ball 500 feet in a college game that Scott Boras witnessed, and I was the catcher on the best team in California in 1965. My American Legion team won the national championship in 70 and 71. I was only on the team in 71, but it took George Brett and Scott McGregor's Legion team from El Segundo to beat us. So in 72. So George was a pretty good ball player. So was McGregor. But I went to college on a baseball scholarship. I led 4 years, D1, and my best year was my freshman year, believe it or not. But I broke my wrist my junior year, and it really put a crimp in my career, baseball playing. But was there a chance that you would play beyond college? I had an offer to play at Tri-Cities by a guy by the name of Carl Thompson, who had a flooring company and loved baseball in Stockton. He wanted me to play for him, and it was an independent team. And I had an offer by the Padres. Ray Kroc had just bought the ball club in San Diego. So I had made the decision to go administration. And I'd gone to school for 4 years with Stoney Feeney, whose dad was the president of the National League, and his grandfather was Horace Stoneham. So once I made that decision, I never looked back. I worked my tail off in that short season in Northwest League in Walla Walla, and then I got a job with the Dodgers AA club immediately for 75. But I've always been like that. I just don't look back. When my little league team got beat in in Portland, Oregon, I had tickets to go see Sandy Koufax on my 13th birthday at Dodger Stadium, and I went to football practice. My quarterback was a Rhodes Scholar and a great Ram quarterback, Pat Hayden, and my coach had played for Bear Bryant and was a lineman on the Detroit Lions, and we had a good football team, so I went to football practice. But it was the best game ever pitched in the history of baseball. Bob Henley of the Cubs pitched a one-hitter, and Sandy Koufax threw a perfect game. So those ticket stubs are probably worth something. I don't know where they are.
And Bob Henley became a San Francisco Giant and was really instrumental in their winning in '62. He was a pretty solid relief pitcher. I mean, he wasn't instrumental, but he helped build the club. And boy, is there anybody that you've had a career in the movies and baseball and this and that? I think your best career is groundskeeper at Cooperstown, by the way. And I'd like to thank you for the ball you sent me. I've thanked you before, but I'd like to do it on the air. I really treasure it. Tell me about the ball and what are the players on it, or the groundskeepers on it. James?
Yeah, what's going on with that?
Oh, no, I don't know. I just want to know the history of that ball. Tell me about the groundskeepers. Tell me about the field that you guys take care of and your love of doing it.
Well, Zach Critton is the head groundskeeper there at Doubleday Field. And he's got a half-brother that's 10 years younger than him. He's a junior in high school now. And he's got a first cousin who's a senior, and he just graduated from Cooperstown High School, so he's going to play football at Utica. And, they work their tails off. They do a really good job. But, it's they don't work just for Doubleday Field. They work for the village of Cooperstown. So anytime the village wants them to go water the plants on Main Street or pick up dog litter, they got to go do that. And there should be a full-time groundskeeper. That's all his job is at Doubleday Field. And I can't change the way things are. Politics are what they are, and I stay out of the way. But
speaking of politics and the Hall of Fame, you mentioned you were in contact with 53 players this past year. How many of them? That's how many were invited. Right now, they are at the Otissaga Hotel, and Jane Forbes Clark never invites me to any of the festivities. Because my granddad didn't marry my grandmother. He was already married, so I'm illegitimate in their eyes. So Jane tries to get me to go work for Cal Ripken at his All-Star Village in Oneonta, and I won't do it because a Ruth will not work for a Ripken. It's plain and simple. I think you mentioned something the other day that there's a rift there. It's a definite rift there. How did that get started?
Well, it's just Cal is on the board of directors at the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and Joe Torre was just named on that board of directors. So they think they can you're a chess piece that they can move around, and I don't play that game. I've got a movie to write, and I'm busy, and I don't want to work for Cal Ripken. That's just basically it.
I appreciate that.
And I have nothing against Cal Ripken or Billy or any of the Ripkens. They're great baseball people, but I'm not going to work for them, and I won't work for Jane Forbes Clark. That's, I won't do it. I can make it on my own.
Obviously, and you have so far. You're 71 years old. You're in good health, and you wake up thinking about baseball every day.
Well, I'm surrounded with it. If you look at my home, there are pictures of Ted Williams, my granddad, Bob Feller, Shoeless Joe, Gehrig, and the induction class that I'm writing the movie about, June 12, 1939, about the story of bringing these 10 Hall of Famers to Cooperstown for the first induction class. And it's
did Ty Cobb miss that picture? Very famous picture.
Ty Cobb missed the picture because he got food poisoning in Utica the night before. And so if you ever see a picture of Ty Cobb in that first induction class, he was airbrushed in. There aren't any existing originals of Ty Cobb in that picture. But he played golf against my granddad the day after the induction ceremony, so I guess he wasn't too sick. But I talked to Cindy through Facebook, Cindy Cobb and Herschel Cobb. I was at the '84 induction ceremony for Ralph Kiner and Aparicio and several others, Pee Wee Reese, and I sat with James Cobb at the ceremony because I had read a 6-page letter that Ty Cobb, James' father, had written to Nellie Fox about how he felt Nellie Fox should be a major league manager. And Nellie, at the time, had been Ted Williams' third base coach. And then when Ted went to Texas, Nellie, this was in 71, and Nellie was his coach in Texas, but Nellie in 76, I don't know, for whatever reason, when Ted did not return to Texas in 72, Nellie didn't get the job. And he passed away in 76 at 47 from cancer. And so he just chewed tobacco all the time, and it got him like it did Glenn.
I think it was Gil Hodges that got the job, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I don't recall. I know Lou Casey was there, and he got in a fight with Lenny Randall, if you remember Lou Casey.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I know
right in the batting.
Lucchesi and Randall didn't see eye to eye, and there was
Randall punched him out right in the batting cage during batting practice.
Right.
So
I don't know if you know that Lenny Randall has been a comfortably zoned guy. We have done many podcasts together. And
he's a great guy. I think the world of Lenny Randall. He's a Virginia kid, and he had a great career. But it really put the kibosh on his career when he punched out a major league manager. You just don't do that. My grandfather did that. He punched out an umpire one time, and Ernie Shore, or Urban Shocker, was the relief pitcher. My granddad faced one hitter, got him out, and punched the umpire, got kicked out of the ball game, and Urban Shocker came in and threw 26 outs in a row. So that my granddad was involved in a no-hitter, a combined no-hitter, but that was his only brush with the pitching no-hitters.
Had he continued to pitch, do you think he would have been one of the greatest all-time pitchers that ever lived?
Well, he had so much success hitting, and they were using him as a pinch hitter, and he was walking a lot of guys, and that's basically he lost his love of pitching because he was such a good hitter. You know, if you can play every day, then he really. My granddad was an active guy. He was a very active individual, and you'd call him high-strung because he couldn't sit for 4 days or 3 days after he pitched and just watch. He wasn't a watcher. He was a doer. So that really had an effect, because when he was growing up at St. Mary's, he played over 200 baseball games a year. He was playing all the time. So when he was just pitching for it ate him up in 1915 when he didn't even get in the World Series. He came up on 7-11-14, and he helped the 15 ball club get the World Series, and they didn't use him in the 15 World Series at all. He didn't pitch one inning, and it really affected him because he is a participant. He isn't a watcher, so he wanted to be in the action, and he felt the best way to do that was to hit, and he was a pretty good one.
Okay. Does the play No Nanette ring a bell in your mind?
Oh, yeah. That was the play that Frazee was supposed to have. He was an investor in No Nanette, and Frazee sold the Babe to the Yankees to get $250,000 so he could put this play on. Well, he also mortgaged Fenway Park to get the loan. He got, they secured it by more than just my granddad. And it was, my granddad got blamed for, having the curse. It wasn't the Babe's curse. It was that Frazee sold all the good ball players that he'd won 3 World Series with in Boston to the Yankees. And, Wade Hoyt, Red Ruffing, all these guys were excellent pitchers. You're going to win if you got great pitching. Well, that's what happened.
Did he make his money back at all on that play?
No, it was a flop. It did not. It wasn't a success. And
wow.
I don't remember. To my memory, I don't recall what year he got out of Boston, but it was on a rail because he had given Babe away, and they loved him in Boston. They absolutely loved him. He bought a Home Plate Farms, his farm outside of Boston, 26 miles from Boston in Sudbury, was where he raised pit bulls, and it was a regular little farm. He had chickens and pigs. He was a farmer. So.
Well, he would have enjoyed my house in Alameda this morning. We were visited by 11 turkeys.
Yeah,
and 2 mothers, and they hung for a while, and then went across the street. It was most turkeys I'd ever seen in one place in my life. That was cool. Hey, James, let me ask you this: do people come up to you, strangers, and tell you stories that educate you about your granddad?
Oh, yeah. I was in a restaurant the other day in Cooperstown, and somebody caught wind that I was in there, and they came up and they introduced themselves to me, and they were from Chicago. And the man, 2 of the guys were from Peoria, which is where my other granddad and I used to take our hogs when I was 3 years old. And this other gentleman was from Chicago, and he knew the people at Wrigley Field that knew my granddad. That's how his name's Roger Baird, but he's 78 years old, and he's the stadium operations guy with the Cubs. And Roger's dad knew my grandfather when he was playing for the Yankees, and he remembered how he had told Roger how bad the Cub players were on my granddad, because my granddad was a friend of the White Sox, and they hated the White Sox. I mean, this is when rivalries were real rivalries. The Dodgers and the Giants, the Red Sox and the Yankees, they really hated one another. You didn't get traded from the Red Sox to the Yankees because nobody did. But my grandfather was like the first. And the Yankees were no great shakes in 1920. They hadn't won a World Series yet. 23 was the first one. So consequently, they were actually the Hilltoppers before, and where Columbia Presbyterian Hospital is on 152nd Street. That's where the original Yankee stadium was.
I think they were,
and then
they were called
they played in the Polo Grounds.
The Highlighters.
Yeah,
I think they might have been called the Highlighters, James. Or
the Highlanders. Highlanders.
Right. Not the Hilltoppers. We're both wrong. That happens.
Yeah.
But not to us.
Well,
I mean,
Oppenheimer just came out. The movie Oppenheimer just came out, and their nickname in Los Alamos, New Mexico, are the Hilltoppers.
That's where you got it confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, but my
I will not stand for confusion on this podcast. So you're the only one I make an exception for.
All right.
James,
my granddad, Rupert, they were playing in the Polo Grounds where the Giants were the king of New York City, and the Giants fans started to go to watch the Babe, and they were outdrawing the Giants. The Yankees were outdrawing the Giants in the Polo Grounds, and Rupert kicked them out. And that's, not McCarthy. The Giants manager hated my grandfather, and he kicked the Yankees out of the Polo Grounds, and Rupert built the Yankee Stadium like a half a mile from the Polo Grounds, right across the river.
Now that was known as the house that Ruth built. How did that come about? That
well, it was Carnegie was a steel magnate, and he owned the Pittsburgh Pirates with. He was a New York City investor, and the owner of the Yankee, Rupert, was in business with Carnegie. And they used Carnegie steel to build Yankee Stadium. And the steel was, they just called it the house that Ruth built because he put so many fans in the seats.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let me ask you this, James. What are the basic misconceptions of your granddad that have been published in books and this and that really irk you?
Well, the guy that writes all those documentaries, that he did Jackie Robinson's Story, he did baseball, Ken Burns just trashed my grandfather's image as well as Ty Cobb's in his documentaries. And, he's saying that Babe was racist. No, he wasn't. He used to hang out at the Cotton Club because he loved Billie Holiday. Just a lot of lies. And he used to say that Babe would pick up cigar butts off the ground and smoke them. Well, my granddad didn't have to do that. He would leave 12 silk shirts made in a hotel when he was on the road. He didn't pick up cigar butts off the ground and smoke them. That really gets me. And he sells that stuff as being gospel, and it isn't. He wasn't there. He doesn't know.
Okay.
And the Cobb family is really put out with him too, because Ty was not a racist. He had a lot of relations with people that were not his color. Let's just put it that way. He got along. A lot of people had bad things to say about Ty, but my grandfather wasn't one of them.
Okay. James, I've been saving this question. All the Hall of Famers that you've communicated with, you must have a pretty good idea whether or not they would show up if Barry Bonds were inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Oh, maybe McGriff and Rowland.
Okay. That's
it. I don't think he'd have a lot of support. That's just my take on it, because he had chances, and it's like Alex Rodriguez. I mean, he went to prison. Alex was suspended a year, but didn't Barry do time?
Yeah, good, very good point.
Yeah, but Pete Rose did time too. So.
Yeah, Duke Snyder did some time. I don't know if he actually served, but there was some sort of scandal about autographs that he was involved with.
Well, there is always going to be derog on anybody who has lived as long as I've lived, or that lived the life that my grandfather lived. There's always going to be something somebody digs up about it. I've crashed as many cars as my granddad did. We have the same problem. We haven't killed anybody, and we're still here, so we must be doing something right.
We haven't killed anybody yet, but the summer is still going, so be careful out there, James.
Oh, I will. Yeah, I'm not nearly as wild as my grandfather was, believe me. My folks were married 67 years, and they put that into me. Fidelity means something in my book. So.
Oh, I appreciate that completely. I'm going on 8 years with Tally. It's the longest relationship I've had in my life, and I'm in my 70s. So, you never know. You never know.
No, do you know Dennis Dupois, who was the photographer for the Giants for 30 years and the 49ers?
I have met him a number of times, but I can't say as I know him personally. He did some work for Tom while I was there. And
I owned a pistachio marketing company in Fresno, California, and Lawrence Hyman, who was a Woodford, Helen Woodford was Babe's first wife. So Lawrence is like a half brother to me, and they were Lawrence did the yearbooks for the Giants and the A's and the 49ers, and so I just got Dennis retired as the photographer for the Giants and the 49ers, and now he's an artist. And I think is painting himself for quite a bit of money. But I just got a text from him that he's coming to Cooperstown and we're going to have dinner. So I haven't seen him in 30 years.
No. Would you ask him if he did the 59 San Francisco Giant yearbook? I'm just curious about that. But it was the first time that they, in a yearbook that I remember, where they had caricatures of the players instead of actually pictures. And I remember I was a New York Giant fan, and that was all a big shock, them moving to San Francisco. I gotta tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is there anything about that move that you are privy to at all?
Well, it was a backroom deal with O'Malley. They did it in tandem, They didn't, if Giants wouldn't go to San Francisco, the Dodgers weren't going to L.A. That was the deal.
And I think the Giants were originally scheduled to go to Minneapolis as their landing part because they were going to leave New York. There was no question about that. James, have you ever been in awe of anybody when you met them? It's tough to imagine that Babe Ruth's grandson can look at anybody and go, wow. Remember, you were Scott Forrest's roommate.
The first movie I ever worked on was called Oklahoma Crude with George C. Scott and Faye Dunaway and Jack Palance. And I used to get George C. Scott his coffee in the morning when he was out on the hill getting ready for his scenes. And I was in the movie. I was an extra as a wildcatter. And George had just won the Academy Award for Patton. So I wanted to be around George C. Scott because I had great respect for Patton in the movie and George C. And Stanley Kramer was the director of that movie, and he did It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, and he did a lot of great movies. And he used to let me do things like we had the Holiday Inn in Stockton, California was the headquarters for the movie. And every morning we drive out to Mike Epstein's ranch out in the hills and shoot. Well, every day at 5 o'clock, the Mercedes bus that was taking us back to Stockton would stop for a beer stop, and all these college kids would go in and get beer. And I didn't. I went back to the Holiday Inn, and I sat with Stan Kramer and watched the dailies. And that's where my love of motion pictures really came. I mean, we used to sit out on the set, and like George C. and Faye Dunaway and would run to their RVs and not be around anybody. But I would sit, I would stand with all my buddies and actors, and they had Mike Wayne's antique cars from 1910 on the set, and they were convertibles. And Jack Palance would sit in one of them, and Hal Smith, the little drunk from Andy Griffith, would sit in one of them, and William Lucking, who was a very famous stuntman and actor, he would sit in one of them, and Sir John Mills, Haley Mills' dad, would sit in one of them, and they would tell jokes back and forth for hours. It was incredible. I mean, just, there was a great camaraderie on that set because of the levity, the laughs. Everybody enjoyed, working. It had a profound effect on me. I like to laugh. I like to have fun, as long as it isn't hysterical.
At somebody's expense. In other words, it's got to be in good taste.
Yeah.
Hey, James, we're running out of time. Come back again soon. Love having you. James Bloomer, grandson of the Babe. Wow, I'm blessed. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all. But I'll tell you, I'm one hell of a producer. Witness James Bloomer. Thank you, my friend.
Have a good one, Ralph.
You too, and thank you for listening, everybody. Like I say, it's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. All of our podcasts, all of our offerings are archived on YouTube. So we've got about 3,000 offerings, and you can go. They've got a wonderful, way to access. I can't think of what I'm trying to say, but you could. It's an index, and you go to YouTube, and you type in people's names, and I've had them. I've had a bunch of people.
I've been picking up the ones I've been listening to ones that you put on yourself. You just like daily. You have the New York day in this day in Mets baseball.
Bill, I've been out of New York since 1965. You mentioned that year earlier, and I went into the Air Force in 1965, and I don't think I've lost any of my accent in 60 years. I mean, I listen to myself, and that's not a good thing. James, come back. We'll talk to you soon. Be well, my friend.
All right, Ralph.
Carefully. I don't want this to be a jinx. I want you to drive carefully. And
I do. I ride a motorcycle, Ralph. I ride a motorcycle, and I drive it very carefully because
beautiful.
New York drivers aren't the best.
Yeah, I can't say anything about that. What can I say? But if you think Los Angeles drivers, if you think Los Angeles drivers are any better, you could be mistaken there.
Well, I rode the white lines for 3 years, brother, and on a motorcycle on a Gold Wing, and I sold it one morning, and I never looked back for 30 years, and now I'm back on a Harley. So I don't know. I enjoy life, Ralph. What can I tell you?
Join the club.
All right.
Join the club.
Okay. Talk to you next time.
Be well. Thanks for listening, everybody. Adios and happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.